Good afternoon, church. Glad that you're back this evening. Open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes 10 and 11. I've enjoyed Ecclesiastes, but I'm not sure I've ever preached a series where I've also been just as excited to be done with it. Just the content of Ecclesiastes, it's good. It's stuff that we need to hear. But it is depressing in a lot of ways. So next week we will finish up. Next week, Ecclesiastes is it's a very different book than any other book in the Bible. It's a philosophical book that addresses a very particular premise, and the premise, although it's not directly stated in the book, it could be worded in the form of two questions that are different but are very similar as well. The first one, does God matter? By the content of the book and the things that Solomon is writing about, the things that he's addressing, the observations that he's sharing, he's getting us to ask the question, does God really matter? The other question, again, is similar, but it's different. But he's also getting us to ask ourselves, what meaning does this life have if this life is all there is? If when my life ends, it's it, and it's over, and there's nothing else after that, then what real meaning and purpose then does my life have, and not mine only, but everybody's life? What meaning and purpose does it have? And we know people who approach life with this outlook. They approach life like God doesn't matter. They're not atheists. They believe in God. They would acknowledge God, and they may even ask God things. And if you pressed them and you asked them, do you believe Jesus is Lord? They might even agree with that if you pressed them on it. But their actions and their words tell a different story. You watch them in life. You observe them in life. And the things they do, the things they say, the choices they make show you their life proclaims a different story than their words, that God doesn't matter to them. Ultimately, God just doesn't matter. They approach life with little or no thought of God, even though they would probably agree that He exists. But there's also a lot of people that fall into the second question. They don't think, or they believe that this life is all there is. And afterwards, there's no accountability to God. There's nothing that happens after this life. When you're dead, and that's it. And I can't help but think, and I don't mean this negatively or speaking down, but how pathetic is that? My life isn't, if that's true, then my life isn't any different. I think I made reference to this in one of the lessons. My life isn't any different or any more meaningful than the squirrel that can't decide whether to cross the road and get squished. I don't mean that necessarily. I mean, it's kind of funny to think about, but I don't mean it in a joking manner, because if this life is all there is, then it's true. My life has no meaning, no value, no purpose. And Solomon is doing his best to destroy this absurdity that people think God doesn't really matter, or that my life, when it's over, that this life is all there is. And so up to this point, Solomon has shared his observations, his life experiences, some wisdom that he's gained probably from living life and making mistakes, also wisdom he's gained from making observations and watching people and the choices that they make of living this life under the sun. And that phrase, under the sun, it's both a location where we're at on this planet and a duration, the extent of our life from birth to death. And it's this idea of life under the sun, living the way you're living your life without God, and the idea that He doesn't matter. So we're going to look at chapters 10 and 11 this evening. 10 and 11 are a collection of proverbs. We look at 1 Kings 4 and verse 32, and it is said of Solomon that he spoke 3,000 proverbs and wrote 1,005 songs. He's the author of the book of Proverbs, in this book as well. And in these chapters, we see a collection of proverbs. And in a way, they seem to be somewhat of a transitional point in the book, where Solomon is kind of transitioning to some true wisdom from an eternal perspective that will be revealed, I think some in these chapters, but more so in chapter 12 as we end our series next week. But in the last phrase of chapter 9, Solomon tells us that our actions have consequences. He says, one sinner destroys much good. And in these chapters, he's going to show us that to be that's true. So if you haven't, open up to chapters 10 and 11. Chapter 10 is all about a little foolishness is dangerous. And let's read verses 1 through 7 of chapter 10. Solomon says, dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench. So a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I have seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground as slaves. So here in the first few verses, we see the problem of foolishness. Foolishness disgraces a wise man's honor, verse 1. You may think, what relation does a dead fly have to foolishness or to folly? Well, perfume smells good. That's why people make it. People make it and sell it because it smells good. We buy it because it smells good, and we want to smell good. And he says, a dead fly spoils fine perfume just because it sits there. It contaminates that, and it makes the whole thing bad, and it gives off a smell, Solomon says. And in the same way, a little foolishness does the same for someone who's respected for wisdom and honor. A tiny dead fly isn't much in proportion to a bottle of perfume. So why not scoop it out and just continue using the perfume? Well, I think it's the same reason that if you sat down to drink your coffee and you found a dead fly in it, you're not going to scoop it out and keep drinking it. You're going to pour it out and ask for another cup, right? It's bad. It's been spoiled. Something dirty, something disgusting has been found in it. So a little folly or one foolish decision can destroy the reputation of someone who's been regarded as wise and honorable. You can strive all your life to build a good reputation and do that and be a person of solid character and good reputation. And one act of foolishness can destroy it all. It can ruin your life, your reputation from that moment forward. So what Solomon is doing here, as one author described it, it's like Solomon is sailing a ship. He sailed the ship from this place and this place all over to show us how, or to show us the meaningless of life under the sun, a life that's lived without an eternal perspective. Now he's starting to sail the boat in the right direction. He's bringing it to land. And in verse 1, he reminds us of an important principle. Our actions have consequences. If one act of foolishness can destroy a reputation, our actions have consequences. Solomon is starting to make his point, and he's sailing the ship towards land. Let's keep going. Verses 2 and 3, foolishness, a little bit of foolishness can't be hidden. The wise man's heart is strong. It leads him to do what is good and right. In the ancient world, the right hand was a place of strength, power, and honor. You think about what the Bible says about Jesus. After his resurrection and ascension, he is where? Hebrews 1 and verse 3 says he's at the right hand of God. Matthew 25 says when Jesus returns, he's going to separate the sheep from the goats. The righteous will be on his right hand. The unrighteous will be on his left hand. Many considered the left, sorry lefties, to be unlucky. This was just an ancient view. Matter of fact, here's a little extra. The English word sinister comes from the Latin term that means to the left or on the left hand. And so the fool gravitates toward the wrong thing, toward the left, is what he says. People attempt to correct him, but he's not going to listen, and this will tell everyone that he is a fool, that he is foolish. Jesus says wisdom is justified by all her children, Luke 7 and verse 35. Wisdom and foolishness are evident in the life of people. Verses 4 through 7, he talks about a foolish ruler. If anyone needs wisdom, it's the ruler of a nation. It's what Solomon asked for when God made him king. God said, ask whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Money, power, wealth, whatever you want, it's all yours. And what did Solomon ask for? Wisdom. I want wisdom. I want to know, God, how to rule your people. And so regarding rulers and those in authority, he said, if they get angry with you, don't lose your cool and quit your job. Do what they ask, and your calmness will pacify their anger. And so Solomon continues with this same thing in verses 5 through 7, and he observes an evil, an error that he says that rulers make. Foolishness is in many exalted places, and the rich, or perhaps a synonym for the wise here, in many lowly places. Verse 7 seems to be a restatement of that same thing, that same idea, but in a different way. And Solomon says, an evil is committed when fools are exalted and the wise are humiliated. But this is consistent with a lot of his observations that life isn't fair. The things that you think should happen or ought to happen aren't always the things that do happen. Remember, he says the fastest doesn't always win the race. Sometimes those who should be in authority aren't in authority, and those who shouldn't be in authority are in authority. Sometimes foolish people are rewarded. Sometimes the wise, he says, are humiliated. It doesn't make sense, but Solomon is setting us up for a conclusion that does make sense. Let's keep reading verses 8 through 15. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stone is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength. But wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before its charm, there is no advantage to the charmer. The words of the wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be. And who can tell him what will be after him? The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. So in verses 8 through 15, we see that there are consequences of foolishness. First, he talks about some foolish workers. Solomon mentions one digging a pit might fall into it. Someone breaking through a wall might be bit by a snake. Someone quarrying stone may be hurt by that. Someone chopping wood could be hurt by a dull axe or have to work harder because of his axe being dull. Solomon isn't saying the person who digs a pit will fall into it. I think what Solomon is saying is the person who is working to dig a pit must be aware of his surroundings, because if he's acting foolishly, he could fall into it. I think that's the idea that he's getting at. Again, actions have consequences. If you chop wood with a dull axe instead of wisely sharpening it before you work, you have to work harder. Actions have consequences. If you're a snake charmer, you better handle the snake wisely, because handling the snake haphazardly could have its consequences. In verses 12 through 15, there are some foolish talkers. Just as dangerous as being bit by a snake is the one who runs his mouth like a fool, he says. In contrast, the words of the wise win him favor. And so in these verses, we not only learn that our actions have consequences, but our words have consequences as well. Destructive, unreasonable, uncontrolled, and boastful words are foolish, and they have consequences. A fool doesn't restrain his words. He keeps talking and talking and talking, but he can't tell you what's to come. And who would want to listen to a fool anyways? Verse 15 says he doesn't even know his way into the city for work. A fool doesn't even want to work or prepare for the future. Matter of fact, he doesn't care to prepare for the future. The fool only lives in the moment. He doesn't look ahead and prepare. Solomon seems to be teaching us to develop a mentality that prepares for the future. Think about what you're doing while you are doing it. Think about the words that you're going to use before you use them. And then verses 16 through 20. Solomon says, "Woe to you, O land, where your king is a child and your princesses feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of the nobility and your princes feast at the proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. Through sloth, the roof sinks in, and through indolence, the house leaks. Bread is made for laughter, and wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. Even in your thoughts, do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich, for a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature tell the matter." So we begin to see some the destructive nature of some foolish rulers. Foolishness corrupts a nation. Although Solomon wasn't a child when he became king, he referred to himself as a child and didn't know what he was doing, so he asked for wisdom. He relied on the Lord. But foolish and self-indulgent rulers are a curse to any nation. But the good, faithful, self-controlled rulers, they are a blessing to any nation. And verses 18 and 19 seem to depict the ruin that foolish leaders cause a nation. He says, the roof falls in and the house leaks, because foolish rulers, all they're concerned about are themselves. They're not concerned about the people. They're not concerned about their policies unless it benefits them in some way. They're not really concerned about the nation. It's all about them. Again, a fool doesn't look to the future, and so actions have consequences. And he says, don't curse the king with your mouth or in your room or even in your mind. Don't even think it. You never know who's listening. You never know what might be told. And you don't want to stand guilty before the king. You see where Solomon's going. You don't want to stand guilty before the king. And as we move to chapter 11, Solomon gives us some good advice about preparing for the future. We move towards true wisdom. True wisdom. Let's read verses 1 through 4. He says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap." Solomon seems to be talking about true wisdom prepares for the future. Now, what he says here about casting your bread upon the waters, it may legitimately refer to some kind of shipping venture or some kind of other agricultural investment, but either way, it requires patience to see the return on your investment. And he says, the wise man works for a return that is not immediately seen. A wise man makes an investment and has patience. He's looking to the future. Only a fool is interested in the immediate gain. In verse 2, Solomon counsels us to be generous or to perhaps diversify our investments due to the unpredictable nature of life. Again, verses 3 and 4 point out the unpredictable nature of life. Sometimes it rains on the earth, which is a blessing. Sometimes a tree falls, which probably has some kind of reference to a disaster of some kind, that disaster strikes. You can do your best to predict what's going to happen and lessen the risk, but if all you do is pay attention to the blessing, you will never reap. And if all you do is pay attention to the risk, you'll never sow. He says you can't anticipate everything. Maybe some things, but not everything. Verses 5 and 6. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. He just kind of says, as you prepare for the future, you never know. You never know. Another example of human limitations. The cells that grow into a baby in the womb of a woman. There's no hard substance there, but bones form. How does it happen? We don't know. Well, I'm sure there's a scientific explanation to that, but at the time of Solomon, he didn't know. But even more than that, how does the spirit of a person enter into the womb there and form in that person? God knows, but we don't. In the same way, we don't know the work of God. We don't know how He made everything and how all of creation works in perfect harmony the way that it does. We can't calculate everything. We can't know everything, Solomon says. We can't maximize every blessing, and we can't minimize every risk. So be diligent and work hard. You won't avoid every risk, but you will reap a reward. Now verses 7 and 8, and that's where we'll stop, because really as you read the thoughts, the chapter break ought to stop there. He says, light is sweet, and it's pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, but let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. He reminds us of the days of darkness. He kind of toys for one last time with this idea or this premise of life under the sun. The reality is that light and the sun are pleasant, aren't they? It's good to stand out in the sun and soak it up and enjoy life. It's good to be alive. I think that's the idea or what he means about seeing the sun and light being pleasant. But he says enjoy life because living with an under the sun premise, this idea that God doesn't matter or that this life is all that there is, he says the dark days are coming. If that's the way you live life, the dark days are coming, and there's many of them. There's a lot. Because if this life is all that there is, and life seems to be random, and there's no, as he observes, there doesn't seem to be a lot of justice in the world or fairness. He says the dark days are going to be many. Disconnected from eternity, life is dark and meaningless. But here's where Solomon is going as he's sailing the ship to bring it home. He's pointing out to us, God does matter. God does matter. God matters a lot. Solomon has been working to help us see that something is coming at the end of life. He's observed that life isn't fair, and we would all agree with him. Life isn't fair. He says good things, previous to this, good things happen to wicked people. Wicked things happen to the righteous. It seems that the wicked prosper and they go to their grave without any consequences. And the righteous, bad things happen to them and they go to the grave without any justice being served. That's not fair. That's unjust. And that tells us that this life can't be all there is. There's got to be a day when everything is set right. There's got to be a day when God's justice is served and the wicked get what's coming to them and the righteous gets what's coming. Solomon's headed that way. There's got to be. Life isn't fair, so it tells us there's got to be a day where everything is made right. Solomon has spent time in these chapters counseling us to think about our actions because they have consequences. A man digging a pit, if he's not careful, he's going to fall into it. A man who's quarrying stone and cutting stone, if he's not careful, he's not paying attention, it's going to fall on him. And either kill him or hurt him. He says, think about your words. They have consequences. You can't just say any and everything you want or anything and everything that you're thinking. They have consequences. Words mean something. And he tells us to prepare for the future. Life is unpredictable and you can't anticipate everything, but make wise investments. Solomon's making a point. He's bringing it home. And the point is, chapter 11 and verse 9, he says, God will bring you into judgment. There it is, church. There's the day when everything will be made right. The wicked may go to the grave without any consequences, but guess what? The day they stand before God, there will be consequences. The righteous may go to the grave without any justice being served, but you know what? On the day of judgment, they'll be rewarded. Life's not fair, but God is going to bring us into judgment. There's a God in heaven who will bring your life into judgment. The truth, and this truth, it fixes, it solves the life under the sun premise. Everything makes sense. When you know that you will stand before Jesus and give an account of your life, all of a sudden, life is no longer meaningless because everything matters. Your actions matter. Your words matter. The way you prepare for the future. Matter of fact, that is the way you prepare for your future. You think about your actions. You think about your words. You strive to live in harmony with God's will for you, and your actions are in harmony with God. Your words are in harmony with God. So you stand in front of God on the day of judgment, and you have zero to worry about and everything to look forward to. Look at Matthew 25. Matthew 25 is all about preparing for the future. And preparing for the, matter of fact, not just the future, but for eternity. We're not going to read the whole thing, but the first 13 verses, the parable of the 10 virgins, is all about being prepared. When the Master returns, when Jesus returns, be prepared. Don't live life haphazardly. Pay attention to your actions. Pay attention to your words. Prepare for the moment that Jesus returns. In the next few verses, the parable of the talents. Be faithful. God has given us the ability, the talents. The talents are money in the parable. But the idea is, whatever God has given you, be good stewards of that. Be found faithful when Jesus returns. And then verses 31 through the end of the chapter. Let's read 31 through 34. When the Son of Man comes in His glory, and all the angels with Him, then He will sit on His glorious throne. Before Him will be gathered all the nations, and He will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And He will place the sheep on His right, but the goats on the left. Then the King will say to those on His right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." And He says, "For I was this and this and this, and you did it to me." And they said, "When did we see you?" And He says, "You did it to these, you did it to me." How you treat people is how you treat Jesus. He says, prepare. Be ready. And then He says in verse 41, then He will say to those on His left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." And He says the same thing to them. "I was hungry, and I was thirsty, and I was naked, but you didn't do these things to me." And they would say, "When did we see you like this?" Because if we saw Jesus like this, we would certainly take Jesus, right? And He says, "Well, when you didn't do it to the least of these, you didn't do it to me." What does He mean? He says, you live life Like God doesn't matter. You lived every decision you made, every word that you've chosen them in a way that you've acted like God doesn't matter. And he says, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. God matters. And your life must be lived in light of eternity. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58, therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not, see that? In vain. In other words, when you live life in light of eternity, meaning God matters, everything you do in the name of Jesus matters. It's not meaningless. It's not vanity. It matters. Every action, every word in the name of Jesus matters. Paul says your work for God means something. When you live for Jesus in light of eternity, nothing is meaningless. Nothing you do is vain. Nothing you do is empty. I want you to listen to this, young people, because next week he addresses you. He talks about remember God in your youth. Because in your youth is when your habits are formed, when your mindset is formed about how you want to approach life, about how you're going to do life. It's all formed. And right now, you're learning that. But it doesn't mean in old age that you can't change anything. There's hope for you. His name's Jesus. And He means everything. And I hope He means everything to you. And we all know people who live life like Jesus doesn't matter. And that this life is all that there is. And they need more, they need hope more than anything else in the world. They need someone to give their life meaning and purpose. And Jesus is the answer because everything you do for Him matters. Tonight, if you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, we give you that opportunity. If you're ready to obey the gospel, you can do that this evening. We will happily immerse you into Jesus for the forgiveness of your sins, to receive the gift of the Spirit, and be resurrected in new life to be lived in Jesus. If you're already a child of God, maybe you've let this idea that God doesn't matter creep into your heart. And for that reason, it's made its way into your actions, into your words. And you're not prepared for the future. You can make things right with Him this evening. You can humble yourself and ask for His forgiveness. And the Bible tells us that He's just and faithful to forgive you. Whatever your need is, please come forward while we stand and while we sing.